one morning, about just on daylight, one of the lads was downstairs cooking breakfast actually, and I was just stooging around the hills looking for a fish mark to shoot. The next thing, the boat lurched and it tilted over, and I'm in the seat upstairs, and I looked out, and there's this bloody big whale's head come out up on the port side. It come up, and it's just this big head, and then flopped back in the water. The boy come running up from downstairs, and what the hell's going on? I said, oh, bloody whale just rubbed its back against the keel.
Hello, and welcome to the Gleam fishing channel. Beautiful day in Nelson, pretty warm, sun's out. It's been a bit miserable of late, but certainly a cracker today. So our next guest, I'm sure many of you will know him. You'll certainly know his name. He's been around a wee while. Dave Wakefield. So Dave Wakefield, there'll be a lot of people out there going, I know Dave, good old mate Dave. Look, Dave's been around for quite a while. He's been involved in developing fisheries, since the beginning, the likes of the orange roughy fishery. He's been involved in some of the more well-known vessels, the likes of the Xanadu and the Wanaka and the Rezo and all of those boats. So, there'd be a lot of good history here for those of you that have been involved in the industry and want to know how it was from the beginning through to now. Grab a cup of coffee because, off we go. Firstly, I just want to actually give a shout out to our sponsors. Guard Safety, go and see them for your health and safety and project management needs, and also the Digital Workshop. So, we work together with the Digital Workshop to put all these things together. So go and see them for your social media, podcast, promotional, or just any digital services. So without them, we wouldn't be able to keep the Gleam fishing channel going. So it's really, really important. So with that, on to Dave. Welcome to the Gleam, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. It's lovely to be here, of course. I've got a few little bits of history to share, I suppose, but I've been around now I was fished for 40 years, and my father was a fisherman before me. So yes, it's obviously there's a bit of knowledge to be shared.
A few tales, I would imagine. So going back, and what I do with a lot of the guests is you touched on your father. So where's your roots? Where's your upbringing? Like where did Dave come from?
Okay, my father was a fisherman. He initially was in Island Bay, and around the around the lower part of the North Island. He originally come from on the east coast of the North Island, but moved to Wellington during the war years. From there, he got tied up with a local guy in Kaikoura, one of the Garb's brothers, and he had a boat called the Vitesse, and they were in a partnership with that. He went to Kaikoura in 1946, I believe, and they were there, and that Vitesse, sadly to say, was moored outside the Pier Hotel in the New Wharf area in Kaikoura, and that broke its mooring and went ashore and was totally wrecked. So he went away back up to the North Island and arrived back down with the Vitesse 2. And he used to moor that at the old wharf and used to crayfish, lionfish, and also do a bit of trawling. And, in conjunction with the local guys there. He also used to drive a truck through to Christchurch to Ferrans Market in the early days. He worked for the lime works in Kaikoura there, right down between the old New Wharf and the old wharf. And he used to drive the truck for them because it's through to Christchurch with the fish that everyone caught locally, or what wasn't sold locally. So yeah, Dad was sadly killed in a top dressing accident in 1956 when I was 6 years of age, and it was a sad day for everyone. We were all there, the whole family, and what had happened is they loaded the top dressing plane the night before, and then I dare say went to the pub and had a few beers, and then they in the morning decided they were going to go and drop it on the Mount 5. And when they went to drop it, it was all solidified in the hold, and they crashed into the side of the hill, and both were lost.
That's pretty tragic, isn't it? That's pretty tragic. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big, really something for me, which obviously it affected me quite a bit as a young fella. But my mum, one of my father's mates come along, and there was 5 of us in the family basically, and he picked up the reins and decided to move us to Christchurch. And well, Mum, all she had was nothing really, the boat obviously, and the house, but no social welfare in those days. So anyway, that's how I got the name Wakefield. My father's name was Bob Evans, and the stepfather's name was Bob Wakefield.
Ah, there you go. Well, there's a mystery solved. Yeah.
So we moved to Christchurch, and me and the stepfather didn't get on well, and so it was a bit of an unsettled time for me, trying to accept what had happened, obviously, and then I started going to school in Christchurch. Well, when I was, and all the way through my schooling, I wasn't the best student. My mother was a school teacher actually, but and at one time I got thrown out of school, and she had to take over and teach me, which was pretty tough on me and her, I think.
Only one time. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it is a lot of our guests. You've probably seen some of the podcasts. We're yet to have someone here that said school were great days. I did really well, and look at me now. So it's a pretty common sort of an issue that we've all faced, I think, Dave. So.
Yeah, well, it was, and as I say, my stepfather and I never got on, and he was unused to looking after children. He'd been a single man when he took over the reins with my mum, and obviously he didn't know how to treat or to approach things properly, and he was quite brutal. So I end up at 13. I end up revolting and giving him a smack in the ear and running out the front door and running away from home. And my mum had always said to me, "I don't want you to go back fishing. Go fishing, sorry. Your father was a fisherman, and it was always an unsettled or never regular income for the family, and so you should keep away from the fishing." Well, that's not what I thought, and so away I go. I ended up in Timaru, sleeping in a bike shed, and then a guy there, and I honestly can't remember his name. He grabbed me and took me on board the boat, and I went fishing with him. And I stayed there for a few weeks and just helping him out, and obviously hiding from anyone that was going to come and get me and take me back home. And eventually he convinced me to go home. And away I headed back to Christchurch with a bag of bloody flounder in my backpack or in the suitcase I was carrying or whatever. And I snuck into home and put it into the fridge. And
Bit of a dead giveaway. You might have been fishing for your mum, though, eh? A bag of flounders arrives, so it's like, yeah. So how did that go?
Yeah, well, in the morning I got woken up and dragged away to the boys' home. And so from there I was just made into a state ward because I was an uncontrollable child. And so I ended up in the boys' home in Stanmore Road in Christchurch. And eventually I was uncooperative, and so they sent me up to a place at Levin. And Coateria it was called, and they had 2 places up there, one for young fellas under 13 and one for over 13. Well, I was 13, but I was a big boy, and I wasn't going to, I wasn't going to fit in really with the younger boys. So they put me in the older one. And the first night there, of course, I got taught who was the boss. So that was a rapid learning curve for me, a very steep one.
Character building, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was a state ward until I was 19.
Yep. Sorry to the viewers, you're probably here. We've got a couple of seagulls having a fight outside, but that's what happens when you record live. So, yeah, sorry, Dave, keep going.
Yeah, and so then I arranged, I started an apprenticeship in a butcher shop as a butcher. And my biggest problem was I couldn't get on with the customers. Well, I didn't like the customers. There was in Fendleton and Christchurch, and they were a bit of a different type from me. So I eventually left there, and the butcher that ran the shop, he was a beautiful man. He taught me a lot, and so it was good. But it was sad to say, "Oh, if I can't handle this," and so I went working at the malt works in Heathcote, stacking barley, and they used to, we used to stack barley 400 bags high, and it was fairly physical work, which didn't do me any bloody harm. And I started playing rugby league, and I played for Hornby, and then mates of mine that I'd run into sort of dragged me over to the West Coast. And that was the life for me, good fun, relaxing, and plenty of bush, and we'd go hunting. And I got a job in a sawmill as a tailor out. and I worked there for a while doing that, eventually soaring, and I worked at 2 or 3 different mills around the place, and got involved in the rugby league on the West Coast too. And I reckon rugby league was probably my saviour, because without that I wouldn't have had a way of getting rid of my aggression, which was pretty well built up, I imagine, internally. And yeah, it was good. I made a lot of good mates there, and then I was coaching because I hurt my knee, and I ended up coaching the senior reserve side. And the guy that was the manager had a plumbing business, and he convinced me to go and work for him. So I worked for him as the foreman in his plumbing business for a number of years, and then I used to do a lot of work on the boats, and so I was always interested in fishing, of course, because of my father. But anyway, I used to go down the boats and repair the diesel heaters, and doing the plumbing jobs that needed to be done. And Ian Boot was obviously in the ear. Why don't you come for a trip? Why don't you come for a trip? Because we knew one another well, and we discussed the pros and cons of it. And he had a guy, Lester Drake, working for him as a deckhand, and so Lester wanted to take over running a boat, and Ian was sort of had other things he wanted to do. So Lester took over the boat, and I helped. Well, he hadn't taken over the boat actually. I did the first trip with Ian and Lester, and we headed off down to Bruce Bay, and we were towing there for flats, and we got a load on, and we were heading down to Jackson's to unload the next day. And as we were punching our way down the coast, there was a bit of southerly or southwest, and we had another boat with us, the Marion, outside. Darren Guard was on there, and we're going down halfway between Bruce Bay and Knights Point, and Ian was hand steering because it was too rough for the pilot. Anyway, I'm sitting in the back in the seat, and Lester's standing beside the stove. There's only room for 2 of us there, and one come aboard. Ian said, "Look out, here's a big one," and it come aboard, and the windows caved in. And so I'm in the seat trying to stand up, and it hit me. The water hit me in the chest and drove me back into the thing, and the wheelhouse was half full of water. So I opened the sliding door, reached across, opened that, and the water rushed out the back door. What wood could go out the back door. The rest went down the engine room. Freaking alarms are going off and all sorts of things. And so Ian spun around. He had actually had a microphone in his hand, and the force of the water hitting his chest, he'd dropped the microphone in behind the wheel. And of course, the microphone was jammed behind the wheel, and
it goes from bad to worse.
So he's trying to turn the boat around, and of course, I jumped up then and grabbed the wheel, and he grabbed the other side, and between the two of us, we got enough strength for Lester to pull the bloody mic out. So we got that out, and of course, everything's full of water, isn't it? It wasn't working anyway. So we turned around and put the weather up our bum, and Ian said, "Oh, we'll be right. We'll be fine." He said, "We can just wander our way up the coast," because we couldn't contact Barry. There was in the Marion outside. "And we'll just wander up the coast until daylight, and then we'll find our way back up to Greymouth." And so, I said, "Oh, we must have a chart here somewhere," but there was no charts on board, of course, in those days. It was just local knowledge more than anything. There's landmarks and things like that.
Landmarks, looking at the horizon and looking at the peaks and troughs and the hills, and
so
making sense of it.
We had a roast in the oven. That was the funny part about it. The roast was in the oven, and it had flown out and onto the floor. So I picked that up, put it back into the roasting dish, put it back in the oven, and then I said, "Oh, I'll get that stove going," because it was cold as hell. Of course, we were all soaked. The bloody folks was full of water. So that's what I did. I started with the stove, and I got the stove going. Righto, put this.
Well, you've done the plumbing time, so you're an expert at getting that going. Yep.
Yeah, so the roast was in the oven, and then the pilot was playing up with hand steer, and so I pulled that apart. We cleaned up the brushes and everything, dried it out, and got that working. And we couldn't get the sounder going and the radar. But anyway, we were fine. The pilot was working, and we put some aprons, because we used to all use aprons in those days. I nailed them over the windows, or we nailed them over the windows, and then, okay, let's head on. But of course, all the bedding was wet, and so it was soaking.
Pretty uncomfortable, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think we had turns at sleeping down the engine room just to keep warm.
Yeah.
And anyway, we slowly worked our way up, and arrived in Greymouth the next day. Well, we'd supposed to have been in Jackson's to unload, and of course Ian's wife was there, and And Barry was there, but he said, "Oh no, I spoke to him last night and haven't heard from him." So everyone was worried. They had a plane, just starting to get a plane up to look for us,
Yeah.
and we went trundling in the Greymouth River and arrived home. So that was my first trip on the
Oh,
West Coast.
your first trip as a young fellow. Welcome to the industry. And you
Yeah.
did many more after that, so it obviously didn't completely shatter you.
Well, actually got me
Hopefully.
going, actually, because then what happened was Lester was going to take the boat to sea, and so I said, okay, and he would need the crew, and so I said, okay, I'll carry on, and so that's what I did. But one of the main reasons I did that was because the guy that I was working for had decided he was selling his plumbing business and was moving to Australia. And so, he said to me, "Oh, you can take, part of the business." He had diggers and stuff like that. And I said, "No, I'll stick with the fishing. I think I'll go that way."
Yep.
So that's what I did. And, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And Ian was a bloody great guy to work with. He was just so pedantic about everything he did. No matter what he did it right. And, right from the bottom of the boat to the top. And his nets were always spot on, hands-on person, and, the line, and then we went lining. And of course, he said to me, "You go with Barry and learn how to do this trot lining." So I went with Barry and we did he showed me what they were doing. And so then Ian and I set the Galaxy up to go lining. So we did a bit of long lining, bottom with a trot line.
So it's the Timber Galaxy, the
Yes.
RIP Galaxy,
That's it.
sitting in Port Underwood, I think. No, Cloudy Bay.
No, she went down off the Greymouth Bar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm thinking the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. The Electric Galaxy was a smaller version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, she had a Cummins, or what is it, NH250 in it, which
Yep.
derated to about 160 horsepower. So beautiful seaboat. And she flipped over on the Grey Bar with the loss of one life, a guy Colville, and he passed away or drowned on that. And his crew member actually survived and got ashore. Actually become a policeman, I think, eventually. But anyway, yeah, it was a sad day when that happened. But yes, anyway, when I went with Lester, we were, we're going away okay. And then Ian's father said to me, "Oh, you should buy a boat, Dave." And of course I said, "Oh, right, okay, yeah. Oh, well, not a bad idea." And the Ivy Bay, which had been built in Moa, it was for sale. And so I thought, "Oh, stuff it." And I went and seen Peter Talley and we did a deal, and eventually I ended up with the Ivy Bay. And so I just worked out of Greymouth, but I used to spend a lot of time in Jackson's.
Yep.
At the wrong time of the year when the bar was shit, to get in and out. I used to go down there in, say, September, the equinox, and so it'd come through. And so I'd go down there and stay there till Christmas and just unload at Jackson's and just tow when I could,
Well,
with the
just
weather.
doing flats and Gurnard. And
Yeah, flats, a bit of
bobs.
Cherokee and
Yep.
just bits and pieces inshore. And so I used to do that, and then of course one thing led to another, and then Peter Talley said to me, "Oh, you should buy a bigger boat." And I said, "Oh, I don't know whether I'm ready for that, Pete." And Barry was in the process of looking at the Sea Lord and the Victory, and he sort of said, "Well, why don't you take one of them?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm quite happy here, Pete. I've been in business with you for a while now, and I said I really don't know whether it's a good idea for us to do that again. I'll just stick with what I got." And I said I might move into a different type of fishing or whatever, but I don't think I'll buy another boat at this stage. And anyway, he then come back to me and said, "Well, Barry's buying the Sea Lord. Why don't you take the Lady Dorothy?" And so I said, "Oh, okay, then what about my boat?" He said, No, we'll get someone to run it. There'll be no problem. It'll all be looked after. Burke will look after it for you."
Yeah.
And I thought, "Oh, okay then. Well, that's fine," because I was interested in getting the bigger stuff. And so I got on the Dorothy, and we were doing pretty well on there. And but the biggest problem I had was my boat wasn't doing so well. And so, they really weren't
Yeah.
looking after it too well. And so, but eventually I was getting disappointed in it. And Berkey came to me and said, "Oh, we'll buy the boat off you." And I said, "Well, okay then. What do you? What's going to happen with the quota?" Because it was in the time when the quotas were coming in.
Yeah.
"Oh, no, don't worry, Dave. You'll get the quota." I was assured by everyone that I would. And I said, "Well, if you talk to fisheries?" And they said, yes, it's no problem. You'll get the quota because you've got the history." Well, cut a long story short, it never happened. And Mr. Talley, I think, ended up with the quota. And I had been trying to get the boat to go scalloping, actually, and because it had a history there. but no, I couldn't get a license. And so eventually it went back to Motueka after Berkey bought it, and they got it scalloping straight away. So yeah,
Yeah,
but
she scalloped quite a bit.
yeah,
Alongside her, we were in like Tasman, Golden Bay, and I guess a bit down the Sound. She definitely did a lot of scalloping.
yeah. Well, it was a bit disappointing, really, but anyway, that's the way it works, and we got to roll with the punches. But yeah, I was on the Dorothy, and then we had an issue on there with a shaft snapped on her, and so Barry said, "Oh, I'm tying it up for a while because obviously we've got to take it to Nelson to get the shaft done, and I'm going to put another auxiliary in." He had a fair bit of work, he said. So then Tally's offered me the Xanadu. I think that's how it worked, and I ended up going to up to Motueka and running the Xanadu for him, carting scallops from Golden Bay to Motueka.
When was that, Dave? It was sort of early 90s, mid 90s?
No, it might have been earlier than that.
80s, late 80s?
Yeah, it was 80s, early 80s, I think, because I went to Australia in 86 after I'd been working with Skeggs. So, yeah, I'd say it might have been mates.
Yeah, I think I vaguely remember it. I was probably around as a young fella scalloping back then, I would have thought. I do remember something like the Xanadu coming over to Golden Bay, and that's before we had the enhancement barge, eh? Like they had the scallop enhancement barge. And so,
Yeah, it was before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I used to pick them up, take them back to Mott, and get in there on the tide and get out again on the same tide.
yeah.
As I can remember all the gravel going through the propeller as I was coming
Yeah,
out.
there's not a lot of water going in there for a boat like the Xanadu.
No.
It's hard enough on a boat like the Gleam, to be honest.
Yeah, we used to be coming in and out of there, but it worked okay. And then things, I think the fishery finished. And so then he said, "Oh, you go trawling with it, take it down the coast or do whatever you want." And so I did a bit of trawling around Tasman Bay and then eventually moved back down the coast because, that's I was classed as my home and everything was down there. So I went down there and I did that. And then Peter said, "No, well, it's not paying out. The boats, it's quite a hungry thing for fuel and everything. It's not really designed to be doing inshore fishing." So I said, "Okay then." And so they tied it up in Westport. And then someone rings me and asked me if I'd be interested in the reso at Skeggs. So I went up to Skeggs and had a meeting with them and with Trevor Jackson's actually. He was the vessel manager then.
Yep.
And Trevor, I said, "What's going to happen with the boat?" I'd been and had a look at it. I said, "It's an engine room full of batteries." I said, "A lot of work there for a skipper engineer. I think you need an engineer on there." And he said, No, it'll be just the skipper engineer." And I said, "Oh, shit. Oh, well, I'm not interested." I said, "I'm not doing that." I said, "You definitely need an engineer
Hard
there
work,
because
boat like the Resolution.
a lot of work there. And there was no auxiliaries on it. There was all battery power." And so anyway, I decided not to. And I ended up, Tally then once again said to me, "Oh, Dave, we've got a job in Westport for you. You can unload the hokey boats." And so I said, "Running around loading gang." And so I said, "Oh, yeah." And looked at it all, and I thought, "Oh, yeah, that'll be right." So I moved. I actually had a little place in Westport. It was owned by Westfleet. They had a little hut on a little one-bedroom place on the side of the wharf there. And so I went and stayed there and did the unloading and organised the guys to do that. And then eventually, what happened then? Oh, yeah, Gary Levy was working for
Yep, Gary's been another guest on here, old Mr. Levy. Yep.
he was working for the vessel manager in Christchurch for the Howard Shadbolt, the Shadbolts. And so he said, "Oh, would you like to take her around there and catch cooter for us? We love cooter because we're making fish fingers and everything." And I said,
Not many people say we love barracuda, do they? That's, you
Oh,
go, but back in the day, that was the main species, eh? Barracuda fish fingers.
geez,
Loved it.
we used to catch a hell of a lot in the Dorothy. You'd
Yep.
be out and unload every day with it. But anyway, so I did. I got the Shadbolt and I picked it up in Nelson and then took it back down the coast, and just that's all we do. It was cooter and a bit of warrior, of course. But yeah, so that was what I did. And then Gary said, "Well, we want it to go back round to Canterbury." And I said, "Well, I'm not real keen on that. I might, Skeggs had actually rang me again and said, 'Would you be interested in the reso?' And I said, 'Well, if you're going to have an engineer, we'll talk.' And so they said, 'Yes, we are.' They'd put an auxiliary in it. It was quite a bit more, altered around quite a bit. They'd lengthened her after she'd run aground that time, of course.
Yep.
And yeah, so I went there and went up to Wanganui and we laid the deck out for actually getting it ready for midwater, because that's what I wanted to do, was midwater fishing.
Yep.
After meeting a couple of fishermen were telling me about net monitors and things like that, it really got me going.
The technology, yeah.
So yeah, anyway, we started off on the reso after we'd done it, lengthened her and done quite a lot of work. Skeek spent a lot of money on it, and away we went, and we're going to go midwater. Okay, well, I'd never been midwater in my life, and so Andrew Hope, which was great. He was Skeegs' buddy um, net man, and he run the loft, and he said to me, "I'll come with you and show you how how it works." I said, "Okay." So he came up, and we went up to Palliser, and that was the end for me. I was made. It was just such an exciting type of fishery.
Yeah. So it's Ruffy, obviously.
No, it was Alfonsino Bruno.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of that with the reso, and of course honestly, it was just the money for jam, but in my way of thinking, it was unreal. And so we had some good guys on there, some really capable crew, and they basically helped me out because I'd never done it before. And Matt Harleyman, he was there, and a few other key people, and we had the engineer, Mitch. He was the engineer, and so I didn't have to worry about the engine room.
You had the A team, and you're ready to go by the sounds of it.
Yeah, just concentrating on the catching the fish. And Andrew was so good to me. He was so helpful with the gear and technology, which was easy enough to pick up, but I needed someone who could tell me all about these nets that had big meshes, and so it was helpful. And I could never only thank him enough for what he did for me. It was good, and we still remain friends, which is good. That's now that after he left Skeegs, we still had that friendship. So yeah, the midwater, and then of course we moved on to a bit of Ruffy, and eventually they asked me to run the Wanaka. And so that was Ruffy full time, basically, Cardinal, Ruffy, and midwater. We sort of mixed the whole year up.
Yep.
And so those days it was PACs, not quota, not individual quota anyway.
So total quota rather than individual quota.
So it was very competitive. Used to tell a lot of lies to the other fishermen things. But
fishermen don't tell lies, Dave. Come on, a little bit of exaggeration and a.
I had Horry working with me, and he sort of used to give me hints of how to do it. He's pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we caught a lot of Alfonsino blue nose, and so the blue nose in particular, and some of the Fonzie seals was a plague. And so I had a one trip there. I remember it was 112 ton of blue nose, and I did that in one night, 3 shots.
Wow, that's a lot of fish.
Bloody lot of fish. And so then I come home and I said to Skeeks, "Are you sure we can still do this?" And they said, "Just keep catching it.
Yep.
They'll tell us when you can't." So anyway, it was good, enjoyable, and the old hunter-gatherer bloody thing that just the adrenaline of
keeps you alive, doesn't it?
Yeah, keep you going. We did a lot of long hours, and both the Ruffy and the midwater, but we did a lot of scientific work too up there. They used Skeegs, the people from Wellington used Skeegs to do the midwater surveys and everything, and so I was involved with them. It was really, and it was encouraging because they were sort of assessing the fish by actually catching it rather than off paperwork.
Rather than theoretical science, it's actual practical science, which has got to be better, right? So
the guys are all good too, good practical people. And I enjoyed that side of it. So anyway, then of course one thing led to another, and I ended up, as I say, from the Wanaka, I did a couple of trips on the Cordella when I got my mate's ticket, and then I did a couple of trips, mate, on the Cordella, which was different again.
Yes, going back, yeah.
So
vessel.
Yeah, it was, and so I still only had my mate's ticket at that stage. It was okay, with Brian Hardcastle's on there as a skipper, and so and after him was Gary and Black Pete. They were on the other swing. So I did that, and then Skeek said to me, "Hey, listen, we want you to go to Aussie." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And they said, "Well, we've got involved in a business over there where we're trying to get. They have Aussies have a different system over there where you buy boats and you get units."
Yeah.
And so they wanted to get involved in it, and it was the start of it was the start of the orange Ruffy fishery, but in the early stages. And of course, there were other local fishermen that we all knew that had moved over there for another company. Rigel Kent it was, and the Skeegs was sort of involved with them for a starter. And so we took the Waipiri over. We took her to Eden, and we did the survey all of New South Wales coast for the government there in the deep water. And so I surveyed the hills off the Gascoyne seamounts and the Cascade Plateau eventually, because we had a GPS, and that was the first one. No one had one over there.
Mm.
They only had sat nav, and so we did the seamounts by plotting them with a GPS rather than just guessing with a sat nav. And of course, the government vessel there didn't have a GPS. We had one, so we did that for them, plotted it all, and then come back. And one of the crew members got crook, and so he had to come back to New Zealand. And then, of course, we'd run out of things to do, and we didn't have a permit to fish. So they brought the boat back to New Zealand. The Waipiri come back. And so I started working for him again back on the Wanaka. And then 2 or 3 years later, Andrew Hope approached me about, he was working for Gonkers then, doing the network there. And he asked me if I'd go to Australia to set up 5 boats with midwater gear and bottom trawl, some in Eden, some in Hobart, and over in Portland in Victoria. So, yeah, I went over there and
Jack of all trades, bit of everything, the sounds of it.
so we went over and we set up some bottom trawls with a boat. I arrived in Hobart, actually. The boat was alongside, and they'd lost the set of gear, full set, and right from the bloody, some of the warp, and so they put new warp on, new flying gear, everything. We had to make it all up, splice. So that was my first introduction to the Australian fishery, was to re-splice all this bloody wire. So we got it all set up, and we went out, and there was an Irish skipper on there, Brendan. He was a bloody good guy, and he was a good skilled fisherman. And so we were actually using a sonar, not GPS.
Yeah.
We were using a sonar.
Yep.
And he was using that. We were working 2 hills that were close to one another, and he was using the sonar on that one to get over the top of the other one. And I thought, gee, this is unreal. This is something I'd never done. And but
clever.
showed him how to set the gear up. But he certainly had the skills on how to use the rest of the fishing equipment. So, yeah, that was the introduction. I did about 5 boats over there, and ended up in Eden, back in Eden to do one last vessel, and then this bloody quite a big. It was an ex-rig tender, and it'd be about 50 or 60 metres long, and a company there had it catching mackerel, or trying to catch mackerel, and they couldn't get it to work, and they'd smashed up their midwater trawl. And so I hopped on the wharf. The guy asked me if I could fix it. So I pulled it all apart. The belly was all gone out of it, and I worked it out, measured it all up, and rung Hongi and said, how about sending over these panels? And so he sent a whole lot of panels over, and I got one of the local fellas to give me a hand, and we stitched it all together and got it ready. Then the owner said, oh, could you take it out? And I said, yeah, no, take it out.
Those jobs that just keep giving and giving. Yep.
So I took it out, and I soon found out that the crew didn't know anything about midwater, and they'd only been pure seine fishermen. Never done it before.
Yeah, that's another challenge.
Yeah. So anyway, we got it all set up. We went out, we shot it away, and put the hammer down, and of course the main engine starts overheating. It just wouldn't do any more than 3.5 knots, and we're trying to catch mackerel. And she was struggling to tow the gear.
Yeah.
The doors were too big, the net was too heavy.
Yeah.
With all the things that were going against the vessel. And so I come back in and said, look, mate, I can change the cod ends. I can cut them back, and it'll work. You've got a wee bit more speed out of it, but the boat's underpowered, and for the gear
You've got 4 or 5 knots or more for the old mackerel, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. And so anyway, we caught a wee bit, but nothing like was very competitive. And so they were obviously looking to put it into cans or something for fish food or whatever. So yes, that was that, and so that's all right. I went back down to Hobart and to the Majestic Star, and Trevor Jackson was working down there as a vessel manager for Monetas, the company from Monetas. I think it's from they were from Sydney, and they had Majestic Star, and Brendan was the Irish fellow was on there. So anyway, went with Brendan again. We went out and come back in again, and there's a guy sitting in a flash car on the wharf. He got out, hey son, I want to talk to you, and he's a Greek fella. And he said, I'm buying a boat in New Zealand. Would you go over and get it for me and bring it back? I said, what do you mean? He said, no. He said, I've done a deal with Sanford, and I'd like you to go to New Zealand, go and see Tom Birdsall, and get the Rakino and bring it back to Australia and work in the Orange Ruffy. I said, oh, right. So I said to Brendan, who is this guy? What the hell is he about?
Yeah.
And Brendan said, don't worry. He owns half the fish market in Melbourne. Jimmy Rakavolis, he said he was a well-known guy. Poor old Jim's passed away now, but he was a great guy to work for. And so I did. Rang up Tom and said, "Oh, I'm coming over." And eventually I got to Auckland and worked it out what we were doing. And then one of the other fishermen there, Murray Wright, Noddy, he come with because he had the skipper's ticket and I only had a mate's ticket.
Yep.
So we took it over to Melbourne. We got into Melbourne. And of course, the authorities in Victoria didn't like us at all. They didn't want to give us any tickets. We were going to do a survey there. And so it all became too hard. And old Jimmy said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, we'll take it to Hobart." And so that's what we did. We took it down to Hobart, had no trouble whatsoever. Our tickets were ratified straight away, and they chumped them over and we could start fishing. But we had to do a survey. So we did that.
Yep.
Just, I went through the hoops with them, and then we started fishing there, the Rakino. And then Murray Wright, we went back to New Zealand after a wee while, and he brought the Albert Sanford over. So we had 2 boats there. And honestly, it was just
Good old names here, eh? Like a lot of people will be listening to those boat names and going, "Yep, remember her." Yep. So you've worked on a fair few of them.
Yeah, it was quite a fishery there, and of course a lot of inexperience as well with how to handle bags of fish. And so you some of the places we fished in, like you just had to pull out too much fish. And so a lot of the local guys and to be honest, they didn't understand when they were catching it too much. And so
What was your biggest bag, Dave? What was that?
Oh,
Of what?
I've had 80-ton bags of roughy, and that's, you can handle it as long as you do it the right way.
Yeah, as long as you've got a system,
If you've got 110,
Yeah.
well, you'd be struggling to get it all without damaging it, And so, we handled 80-ton, but I wouldn't, on a bigger factory boat, yeah, sure, you can. But on those smaller boats, it's a bit hard.
Yeah.
Well, Saxon Onward, I know I've had, 80-ton bags on her, and we were splitting on her, which was good. You just bring it straight aboard and put it.
Just pull it.
in the hole. And we had brine, so it was bang, drop it down.
Yep.
Take another split.
Yep.
But yes, it's sort of, I did have a bag once on the Wanaka, it was Cardinal, up the east coast, and we were up there, and what happened was when I'd seen the fish go in, I thought, shit, we better get out of here, and started hauling, and then another mark, and I thought, gee, what's going on here?
So you hold into a mark.
Yeah, and the picture went weird. It was an old Coden bloody monitor, which weren't very good anyway, and we got it up, and all we got was the cod end. There was still fish in it. It was still full to the bloody lengthener, but there was nothing left. There was just four belly ropes hanging it.
So you'd blown it to bits, just went through.
So I just slowly winched it up.
Yep.
And then Horry was the bosun on the boat at the time, and he wrapped a strop around it.
Yep.
Got it inched up a bit further, got another strop around it.
Yep, get the cod
all aboard. So we got it all aboard, but
no net.
no head of the net, no.
Yeah.
It was all gone. The head was gone. But, those sort of things did happen because we were running with stuff that wasn't quite good enough, electronic-wise. So, that's, big bags, they were always okay, but they were always hard to handle too, and you damaged the fish. So we tried to shy away from that, and we got smarter, obviously, and worked out how much you were taking, and of course then they went to catch sensors, and so you knew how much you were.
Technology evolved, didn't it?
Yeah.
What was your favourite? So there's a lot of boats and a lot of fishery. So when you look back now, what was your favourite boat, your favourite fishery, your favourite time? Like if you could do it again, what would you be doing?
Oh, I love my time on the Wanaka. It was good, and the Skeggs family were good to me too. They did. They looked after me. They were good, they were hard people. They wanted their pound of flesh, but they were still good people to me.
Yeah.
And then I went to Australia. And of course, the Saxon Onward, I got involved in the partnership there. There was 4 of us there, and she was a beautiful seaboat, just magic. So we did a lot of work between Australia and New Zealand. And so I'd come into New Zealand, unload here in Nelson, I unloaded in Wellington, and then I'd go take a load from the Lord Howe back to Sydney. And unload in Sydney. We used to be able to unload in Darling.
All over the place. Yeah, Darling Harbour.
Well, in those days, you could unload.
Days, weren't they?
Yeah. Of course, it's changed a lot now. You wouldn't be able to get away with that. But, and so we'd take a load back to there, then come this way if we could. And, we had a few issues with with fisheries because we didn't have GPS in those days, and they used to always say, "Where you catching fish?" We'd say, "Oh, this is where we're catching
Yeah,
it."
we
So,
think we're catching it about here, but we actually don't know. But
yeah, we actually knew where we were,
yeah,
but they didn't. So they were a bit suspicious that we were catching it inside the 200, but we
yeah.
weren't. We were well and truly outside, and it was a good fishery out there.
Landmarks are pretty hard to use outside 200 miles, aren't they? There's not a lot of
Yeah,
landmarks
we had
out there, Dave.
GPS in those days, so
Oh
we had
yeah.
that. Yeah,
The old sat nav where you sit around waiting for the fix, once a day or twice a day. I think we used to get in the 80s. You'd be sitting there going, "Oh, we think we're here on the chart," and then up would pop a latitude and longitude, and you're miles away normally. But yeah,
yeah, that's true, and that's what happened when we did the work down the Cascade Plateau. The stuff that their government Siro had done was miles out, as far as the contours of the hill. So we replotted the whole thing, and it took us a while actually. We just round and round and bloody did all the contours and then give it into fisheries over there. So yeah, it was like in us at sea. It's the other thing, we first with the Rakino, we had that when we went to Australia.
Mm.
And I think it was the only one over there. It was great. We could talk to the company and without having to use the radio and codes and things like
Yeah.
we used to do.
All the
Yeah.
codes and the lies and all of the I understand. I recall some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a bit of that went on, and
Cut
like
everything in half, and then they just know to double the amount at the other end, or vice versa, wasn't it? Really?
yeah, we had a code book. Everyone had one of them. They were all different. We used to steal them from other boats and all
Yeah.
sorts there.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was on the Saxon onward, we had some funny things happened. Like I we put a new motor in her, and obviously we put a nozzle on it and a new propeller because she was really uneconomic. Used to burn a lot of fuel. So we put a big Cummings in, and they put a nozzle on and everything like that. Or we didn't think that the paravane arm was not long enough because of the suction that coming through the nozzle. And so we went out
Oh,
first trip
I
out.
don't like the sound of this. Yeah.
Yeah, first trip on the Lord Hour, and bugger me if I put the paravane in the water, or the boys dropped it in the water, and it went in, and I knew straight away what had happened. You could see it. It had gone in. So I pulled her out of gear, and just slowly, and it rushed out. The boys pulled the damn thing aboard, and it was all bent and buckled. It wasn't buggered, but
Yeah.
it was in it. So I got it. We repaired it, and so I got a message through the office saying, please have a paravane available for me when I get in, and probably to get cable as well, so we've got a spare one on board.
Yeah.
But a bronze whaler attacked the bloody paravane, and so that's okay. I thought, oh, that's just a bit of
There's
humor.
another fisherman tale. Yeah. Bronze whaler called quartz nozzle and propeller. Yeah.
So anyway, we got into port, and bloody a business partner said to me, "Jesus, a bronze whaler attacked that." And I said, "Oh yeah, shit, yeah." And anyway, I found out that he told other people, and they were all fascinated with this story. Eventually, I said to him, "Oh, sorry, but it was actually the propeller."
Well, it's a bronze. It's a bronze propeller, but bronze whaler. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so we ended up extending the arm another bloody metre and a half to
Get it
to
outside.
keep it outside. Yeah, so the suction, but yeah. So that was that. But we had I had various things happen at sea, but there's a lot of stories, of course, and going for hours. But
Well, anything really interesting? I mean, that's something that we talk about with a lot of our guests. Is anything, interesting, I guess, frightening, scary that you've seen at sea, whether it's an event, marine life, anything sort of interesting that you can think of that the viewers might find interesting? You've had a lot of days at sea and a lot of time at sea, so you must have seen some interesting things out there.
yeah, I certainly have, and sort of I've had a couple of incidents, I suppose you call them. One morning, about just on daylight, one of the lads was downstairs cooking breakfast actually, and I was just stooging around the hills looking for a fish mark to shoot. And the next thing, I'm just sort of at that time of day, as you imagine, you're a bit bloody half asleep or whatever.
Yep.
And it was foggy. It was just just not thick fog, but just a misty day. And anyway, there was another boat in the area. We'd been talking, and he was looking at another hill. And the next thing, the boat lurched, and it tilted over, and I'm in the seat upstairs, and I looked out, and there's this bloody big whale's head come out up on the port side. It come up, and just this big head. and then flopped back in the water. The boy came running up from downstairs and, "What the hell's going on?" I said, "Oh, bloody whale just rubbed its back against the keel." He said, "Oh, bullshit," And I said,
Yeah.
"Okay." The next thing, this bloody whale, it was a big sperm whale, flapped its tail right beside the boat and just flopped all the water down there. It was just
Yeah.
unbelievable. Yeah, that was an experience I'd never repeated. But I've seen a lot of whales,
Mm.
sure do. But yeah, one other time we had a whale that was dead in the water, and it was a young one. And anyway, there's a killer whale there hanging around and munching on it.
That'll be why it was dead, I would imagine. Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it
Yeah.
was having a feed off it, and so anyway, I said to the boys, one of the boys, I said to the engineer, I think I said, "Here, take my camera," because I always had a good camera on board, and shitloads of photos. And so I said, "Go at the bow, and I'll just nose up as close as I can get. You take as many photos as you can."
Yep.
So sure enough, he did, or we did. I nosed up there to it, and then I pulled away because it didn't disturb it. And then the next thing, it sunk. Okay, so I pulled away, and he come up the wheelhouse, and I said, "Geez, I can look at these photos." So when I looked at the photos, there wasn't one in it. It had the cap on the end of the camera,
Oh,
so I didn't have
once
any.
in a lifetime thing,
Yeah,
and the lens cap was on.
yeah, got to
Nice.
see it again. One of the other guys had told me about it, and
Yeah.
so that's why I'd gone over there, because he didn't have a camera.
Yeah.
And of course, I had to give him the disappointing news that I never got any photos. He was as pissed off as I was.
Yeah, it would be too. Yeah, because you were a bit of a photographer, eh? You were saying earlier that sunsets and sunrises and the aurora and all of that. I mean, we're pretty lucky, eh? Like when you're away from the light of the land and out in the middle of nowhere, we do see some pretty amazing sights, don't we?
Yeah, that's for sure, Darren. I've got about 8,000 photos in my storage somewhere, and I've got different memory sticks full of stuff. I used to take the sunset and sunrises was I suppose, my favourite time, and it was beautiful being out there. And then the other thing is, of course, rainbows. I've got
Yep.
different rainbows. I've got double rainbows and triple rainbows and all sorts of different stuff. That it's now just in a file in my computer, and I've got some memory sticks there with different ones from down south. And the aurora, when I was going down the Auckland Islands, the first time I went down there, it was just it was mesmerising. It was really good. And I was on a boat called the Clarabelle then, and of course the Clarabelle had these pull down screens in front of the windscreen, which cut the sun glare back. So
Yep.
you could see it through that, and I took photographs through the bloody shaded one, and I took photographs without the shade, and
Yep.
it was just mesmerising for me.
Yeah, if you've got a few of those photos, we'll bang them on the on the podcast for the viewers, like any of those that you think might be interesting. But I'll leave it up to you to look through the 8,000 photos.
Thanks, Darren. I do have some of them in files, so
Yeah.
right.
No, that would be awesome to have a look at that. So what about what have you enjoyed in the sector? Like you've been in it a while, you've done, and I know currently you're in a vessel management role, so you're still actually, you're up in Napier there, you're still involved in the industry. I mean, what have you enjoyed? Why would someone else want to do it? Like you've had a lifetime of it. Like most of us, we're getting towards the end of our probably time in the industry. But what's it bought you, and why would some, if there's someone sitting out there that may not be doing so well at school, like many of us, or they're just looking for the next thing, why would they want to go fishing?
There's a lot of things, really, a lot of reasons. But over the years, I've taught a lot of young guys a simple process of how to cook a feed. You get guys that come on board and they just can't even boil water. They've never done it. Mums never show them. Or when I was young, my mother taught me the same as my sisters. I had to learn how to cook and how to do everything. So it's done me well in life. And to have a young guy come on board that's got no skills at all in that area, and you take them under your wing and teach them. I've had a number of guys like that. Like I've got there's skippers in the industry that which started off with us at Skeggs and other areas that I was in. In Australia, I got a young guy over there that he calls me his second dad. He's sort of started off as a 17-year-old boy and just a mad keen fisherman. But he learned all the skills that went with being on board a boat. And camaraderie that goes with it. That's the thing, you make a lot of mates and you make them all for life. And we all know one another in the industry in New Zealand, or most of us do.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know a lot of the younger guys now, but the thing is, the older fellas, we all know one another, and we've had dealings with one another. We've told lies to one another, and we've done all sorts of things together.
Probably drunk with one another, fought with one another, all of those things.
They're all of those above.
Yeah.
But it's been a thing for me is the challenge of the hunter and gatherer.
Yeah.
To me is what used to drive me. And to be honest, if I could go back to doing what we were doing as far as fishing goes, with the challenge of actually chasing that fish and catching it, I'd love to do it. But with the restrictions that are here now for the young guys, and obviously it's all a lot of it's for the good, not all of it, but it's a pleasant place to be out there on the ocean, and as I say, the mates you make is important.
Yeah.
And you stay there for the rest of your life.
No, I think that's a good point, Dave, and that's it's what a lot of the guests say, isn't it? Like, you got your family at home and your family at sea, and I think we touched on earlier as well that you're at sea and it's it's hard work, but we're professionals and you get it done and everyone's got their role, and then we come home and sometimes we struggle to adapt to home life, eh? So because we're out there. We are the boss, and then we come home and we try to be the boss, and sometimes we get our ears chewed or our wings clipped. So I guess just touching on that and family. I mean, what are your thoughts on the impact on your family? We spend a lot of time away from our family. So what's the I guess a message to them? What's the how does a family support a good fisherman?
Yeah, that's a big question. It covers a wide range of things, like a lot of fishermen go home and they're, as you say, the boss at sea, and they carry that on rather than actually having to fit in with the boss that's at home. And so, I was lucky, and I've been unlucky as well, but I was lucky to be able to move into a relationship where I had that comfort, and I would go home and just do what I was told, or not do what I was told, but we'd just blend in with one another.
Follow the rules, Dave. Follow the rules.
Blend in with one another.
Yeah.
And I know that it's hard on family because you're away so much. Like, I spent a lot of time at sea and away from home. When I was at Skegs, we used to do every trip. There was no trips off.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I went to Australia, because they wouldn't give us trips off. There was no likelihood of that happening, because that's what I asked when I was in Aussie and I got offered the chance to take the Rakino over. Can I get trips off? And they said no. And so I said, well, I think this is a better option. So that's what we did. But, like, children suffer. This is where it does, because you're when you're doing every trip, it's hard on them, because you don't have that bond. You don't make the bond that you could do if you had 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. When I got 6 weeks on and 6 weeks off running the Seaman Explorer out of Auckland, it was great. I used to come home and my wife and I'd go bike riding every day, and we'd bike around Mott there and just have a great time. I'd do 40K someday. It was just bloody great. And it was physical exercise for me and for her. And so, it was a good way of passing your time. And it just, if you don't have time off, you can't do that. It's just
work-life balance, I guess, and that's the key, isn't it, with all the primary industries, it's getting that work-life balance is important. And you touched on the factory boats. I mean, the benefit there is 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off, so you get as much time at sea as you do at home, and you get paid for both of it. So there's definitely an opportunity there. But of course, if there's those that just want to go hell for leather and hard graft, well, then you can do that as well. It just means you get your house, your car, or whatever you need quicker. But you've always got to bring your family along and have that balance, don't you? Really?
Yeah, it's important, and now I see how important it is. With with my life the way it's worked out, it's great to have family around you, but you need to spend the time to actually build that family and build your life successfully.
Yep.
So as you say, a work-life balance.
Yep.
It's just something we weren't able to have in the earlier days, but nowadays they've got it. And so for a young guy to go into the fishing industry, it's a great future for them. They've got a steady income that they get looked after well on board. And so, yeah, I think it's it's a different environment to what I'm used to and what we're all used to in the early days.
Yep.
But it's not to say it's a bad environment. It's obviously more health conscious, and they're probably eating better than we used to. They're sleeping better. So yeah, there's a lot of good things.
Cigarettes and caffeine and Coca-Cola and pizzas, wasn't it? I mean, that
Yeah.
gone are the days of that. You look at some of these on the previous one of the other podcasts, we had a cook and talked about the great food that they get and a bit of balance. But I've got to say, probably why I've got the shape I've got here, I'll use that as an excuse, is dietary requirements it was just fast and furious and whatever was ready. But they certainly look how they got chefs on all those boats now, don't they?
They do, yeah. I when I went to Cordella, that was what I was impressed with. The food quality was great. But I always used to like the boys to do vegetables, and of course I was laughed at for a while. But the thing is, I used to always say, if you're cooking a meal, I want 5 vegetables. If you don't cook 5 vegetables, you're cooking again tomorrow night. And so we all took turns. I used to take turns as well. And I enjoy cooking. I do all the cooking at home now, but it's just something that I was taught when I was young. But the thing is, people have got to realise that a good diet's good for your health, and so that's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely necessary. So I guess we'll start thinking about winding up soon. But thinking back at your career, and so any sort of other comments about the industry or any other cool stories or anything that we haven't really talked about, anything the viewers might be interested in? Like normally when we get to this stage of a podcast, some of the guests go, "Oh, I didn't mention this, that, or the other thing." But anything else, Dave?
Yeah, well, there is countless ones actually, but there's one that sticks in my mind about being at sea and being worried about your situation. Something goes wrong, and something breaks down, and you got to try and find a way around it. And that's a lot of the things that fishermen are good at, is being very resourceful.
Yeah.
To get the boat home and get the crew home safely. So one time I was in the Southern Ocean, south of Tasmania. We were down there in the Roughy, and we become fast on a hill, and for some reason we don't know why. Well, I don't know to this day why. But we lost the generator, the DC generator, and of course the winches were all DC powered, and so we were stuffed there. We're fast on the bottom,
stuck and no winches.
Yeah, and so gosh, what are we going to do? If we lost that generator, we'll need to disconnect it, and so from the gearbox. So the engineer, in his wisdom, decided to disconnect it and leave without putting any sort of retainer on the roller bearing inside the back of the gearbox. So when we wound it up again, because we had another auxiliary, we could run the bloody sweep drums on, and we could retrieve the gear once we got it off the bottom. And when we started her up, of course, the roller bearings, all the rollers come out of it, went straight through the gearbox. Ooh. So we're stuffed. We're in the water there, fast on the bottom, blowing a gale, and thinking, shit, what am I going to do here?
No gearbox.
No gearbox.
No winches.
Yeah.
It's not a good situation.
So what we did is we actually just sat there for quite a while, and everyone's a bit nervous, of course. And so I said, right, anyone know how to play crib? And the boys, none of them did. So I said, right, let's learn how to play crib. So we sat in the wheelhouse playing crib and settled everyone down, and we, obviously just waiting there for the weather to settle a bit. And eventually we come off. And so we'd discuss it, as we were playing the crib and doing whatever, trying to occupy ourselves to stop us being all nervous.
Yep.
Okay. We can run the sweep drum. Once we get the warps up, once we get unhooked, we can run it, we'll fleet it on. So that's what we did. We fleeted it on. It was 1,800 metres of wire, and we fleeted it on. It's on the Cape Hood. It was a reasonable sized vessel. And so you get 50 metres at a time, put a chain strap around it, pull it up, and then take it up on the net, on the sweep drum. And we got it all on the sweep drum. We got the gear up the back, pulled it aboard. Okay, then so we're talking to shore and saying, oh, we need to be towed home.
Yeah.
And so there's no way we can do anything here to get it right. And so anyway, we got all the old sweeps up, or the new sweeps. We had spears on board, and we had to splice some more wire. We took some warp wire off and spliced it up, made up a bridle, ready so that we could be ready for when a tug arrived. Well, the bloody tug arrived, and it was only a small tug, and sort of so we okay then. So eventually come alongside. We dropped the tow the beginning of the rope on board, the wire. They pulled it on board. They hooked it on, and then they started towing us. Well, I suppose about 2 hours into the tow, because we'd drifted outside the 200 at this stage, and we got just inside the 200 again, and it snapped the rope. And these guys said, "Oh, it's too rough for us. We're going to have to go home." And so we left
to it.
So we left to it.
Oh,
So we're there drifting back down, and it was blowing hard. I can tell you, the radar scanner wouldn't turn. That's how much it was.
that's a fair few knots to do that.
So, but
Yeah.
she was a big boat. She handled
Yeah.
it really well. You weren't uncomfortable there, but it was just thinking, how are we going to get home? So the Corvina, was in the area, but the weather was too much for him to try and tow us, so we had to wait.
Yeah.
So we just waited and played a bit more crib and talk shit. The boys played video games, and so we eventually got it. The Corvina was going to come over and grab us. She's a smaller vessel than us, but capable enough to tow it. So we made up a set of bridles again for him, and we got him all set up. And then he came right alongside the bed, did a beautiful job of coming alongside. We dropped it on his deck, and then he hooked it onto his two points at the back there where he used to moor on. And they were
That'd be good, solid.
It was just solid fixes on the stern, and was out of the road of the prop and everything like that. So we had a bridle there all set up, and he started chugging away, taking us into Hobart, doing about 2.5, 3 knots. It took us ages, but it was no problem. Everyone was so happy to be moving. So we got in there, and then of course the gearbox was
shot,
pretty
ball
shot.
bearings through it. So not so good.
Wasn't good at all. And so, but the insurance company come down, and they decided how they were going to repair it. They were going to take the main drive cog out, and they machined it down and reinstated it and put it all back together. And then, of course, I'm trying to get a pilot's exemption for the boat because I didn't have one. And so then they found out that I needed a mate's ticket at the time. And so I said, all right, okay, this is Western Australia, was the Western Australian Survey. They said, no, you can't have an exemption because you haven't got the right qualification.
Oh.
Okay, then shit. I've been meaning to go and do my skipper's.
Gunner. Yeah. We're always meaning to do this, something like that.
So anyway, I booked, Hamish McGibbon actually he was with me. He was the other skipper on the boat, and he was off at the time. And it was me and the owner's son on board, Nathan, and Nathan had the right qualification. So anyway, Hamish rang up a mate of his at school, John, I can't think of his last name, but anyway, he was there and they booked me into school, and I come over here. That was in 2000, yeah. And so I come over and did the last ticket. Yeah, sure.
Good things take time, Dave, eh? So there's been a few hairy events then. So I'm going to change the topic a little bit. It's an election year, right? So, what's your thoughts? Any advice for the government of today, or any potential government going forward? What's a vote decider for you? What do you think's important to get New Zealand, keep New Zealand going and get us on track? What advice would you give? Don't worry, the politicians won't know where you live, and we can, blank your name out. We're all good, but I think it's important that they probably hear from grassroots people like ourselves what's important to us.
So the fishing industry, it's something that's important to me is the fishery, obviously, and every other fisherman's the same, and that's not the story that the public get. The public get a misaligned tale about how the fishermen are destroying the environment, and I never would believe that anyone would destroy their future, and it's just impossible to think that you would do that. Who else would even think about it? So, that we need to have some truth getting out there about how the fishermen are passionate about their industry and passionate about conserving that industry. The politicians, we do have some that are speaking on our behalf, and they're getting bagged from the environmental idiots that are around. It's just, we had a meeting in Napier a week or two back with Lawson and some of the guys from the Area 2 management team. And there was a couple of local fishermen, recreational fishermen, invited along to the meeting. Now that meeting, we discussed things. Was one of our commercial guys, owner, got quite angry with the guy who was part. They are aligned with the legacy, and also the Sports Fishermen Association in Napier. Now we've got a good relationship with these guys up there. We've got an area which, since I've been up there, we've opened up an area which is, we don't fish in. It's a closed area, Springs Box.
Yep.
And the Springs Box is where there's a lot of spawning snapper and everything go there. So we don't fish in it. The fishermen have made a voluntary thing. They won't do it. They've increased the size of their cod ends so they can release smaller fish.
Yep.
And the recreational fishing has been brilliant. They're all saying it's great. They're really happy about their catch rate and how they're going. And the bay's way better than it's ever been. And so we get on well with one another.
Yep.
But then we get stories that come from the Auckland people that are up there saying, oh, the commercial fishermen are wrecking the bloody industry and stuffing it for us recreational people, which is not the story we're getting from the people in the Hawke's Bay. So, that's something that's a good story. I'd love to hear that sort of thing in the media, because then people would understand that, there is a way around these problems.
Celebrate the success, eh? I guess we've talked a little bit about that it's a shared fishery. We've all got responsibilities. I mean, we're sitting here on the Gleam here at the moment. There'd be no more than probably a dozen small inshore boats, 8 to 10, that actually fish out of here. But what we've been sitting here for, just over an hour, and I've been looking out that window as we're talking and seen probably 12 or 15 recreational, fishing vessels go past. They've all been out fishing. So bit of a numbers game, eh? So, I mean, I think for the future of the fishery, we have to know what their take is,
Yes,
because, we are reporting, we're getting bagged. And I really think for those that are keen recreational fishermen and care for the fish stocks, if they don't start figuring out how many fish the recreational are taking, and it's something like, I don't know the number, 600,000 or 700,000 people go recreational fishing every year, compared to about 2,000 commercial fishermen. So the old and the commercial fishermen numbers are coming down, the recreational fishers are growing. So the whole argument of, but the commercial take way more than recreational, particularly inshore, that argument's turning, right? So there's a lot of species like snapper that it's showing that the recreational fishers are taking more than commercial. So I think, I'm worried about some of these shared fish stocks because we're not getting the science, and we're just seeing it. As you go to any port these days and you look at the amount of commercial boats versus recreational vessels, and it's a numbers game, right? It doesn't take much to figure out what potentially could go wrong.
You hit the nail on the head there, Darren. It's something that's we've been trying to get the recreational guys to actually report what they catch, because then that's the truth. Where the one thing that annoys me is that the science is non-existent. We've got it's on catch versus the reporting that we do for our catch as it goes. That's all they assess on what the stocks are, and that's bullshit, because the stocks need to be assessed by using a trawl net. And days gone by, we used to use trawl nets to do studies, and when they used the trawl nets, they were the same net every time they used
year
it.
after year.
You got the same bloody results, and so that told them whether the stocks had depleted or the stocks had increased, and it was a true result of what they could find in the bloody water. And of course now, what the CPUR is what they assess their stocks on. That's wrong. Yeah. But they don't do the recreational guys, because we're expected to do it in our electronic reporting and everything.
Yep.
Our guys are diligent about it. They can't make a mistake, because if they do, they get pulled up.
And there's a camera they're watching.
That's right. You've got cameras as well. And so, the recreational guys, like I was told in Auckland, we used to have fisheries come on board the Explorer when I was running her up there. They used to come on board and they used to say, or not all of them, but some of them used to say, there's at least 1 million voyages every year out of Auckland Harbour itself. Only Auckland Harbour, not all the surrounding ports. Yeah. And so they all go out and catch fish. Now, if they catch one fish each, just add it up to how much of that is. It's a lot of bloody fish.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. And I guess the other thing as well is the environmental impacts, silt and sedimentation and, all of these things are impacting fish stocks as well. But of course, the commercial guy gets hammered for it. And I think we all need to, recreational or commercial, we should be actually working together to identify some of the land use practices that are impacting our estuaries and our breeding stocks and our juveniles and our mussel beds, all of those things, because we're losing those in some areas, and it's nothing to do with anyone that earns a living on the water.
No.
But people just need to recognise that. So
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I've had 2 stints at where I am now, and in between I was working elsewhere. But the initial time I was involved with a group there that was with the regional council. Now, the regional council had done a study. They had 2 scientists did a study on the flow from the rivers and the silt that come out. And since then, of course, we've had Gabriel, and this is in Hawke's Bay I'm talking about. Gabriel come through, and of course there was silt and logs and all sorts there. So they had 4 commercial boats out there trying to plot where these obstacles were in the water, and obviously there was worry that there was a vehicle with a body in it and those sort of things. So we're trying to ascertain where everything was so that it was good enough to be able to tow there. But the sediment on the bottom can't be doing any good. And of course, it's not caused by any commercial fishermen. It's just it. And I know that our little day boat the other day went out, brand new set of sweeps on, big heavy rope sweeps so that he can actually get over the bottom. It's a bit soft and not do too much damage to the bottom. Yep. He got stuck and it was silted up and he had to winch right back to get over the top of it to get it off. It was just silt.
Soft.
And soft bottom. So that had never been there before. And so it was obviously something new. And obviously it comes out of the rivers. Well, as you probably heard before, the amount of water and rubbish that's come out of those rivers up there is incredible. Right, not only just in Hawke's Bay, but up up at Gisborne, the north of Gisborne there, it's shocking the amount of stuff coming out of the rivers.
Yeah, it's definitely changing without a doubt. Hey, look, Will, it's been pretty cool. Start winding up. Any final thoughts before we sort of wind up? Anything you haven't talked about again? I'll give you round 2. We've done one final thought, but any last thoughts or anything you want to comment on, Dave, before we wind her up?
You haven't mentioned that I'm involved with the First Mate Navigator, I don't think, Darren.
Yep.
But I'm pretty passionate about that.
Yep.
I believe we need it in our industry. There's a lot of stressful factors involved in the industry nowadays with electronic reporting, cameras, just the general rule changes that are coming through all the time. We've got a round of stuff coming through from Maritime New Zealand, which is going to change in cost. The boat owners, a lot of money. People haven't thought about how much it's going to cost them because it's going to drive people out of the industry if they don't look at it sensibly. And, I've downloaded all those things they want to change, and I've got them, and it makes me shudder to think what people are going to have to do. Environmental changes, sure, but the thing is, they need to be practical about it. And like even to bring a new vessel into New Zealand from overseas, you get a second-hand vessel in Australia, bring it to New Zealand, it costs you a fortune to do the rewiring, to do all the work that's compliant with New Zealand regulations. We bought a vessel from where did we go? New Caledonia. Okay, we bought it down here. $380,000 later, the rewiring was completed to suit the New Zealand standards.
Wow!
So that's a big cost on top
of
a
big cost for a bit of wire, isn't it?
That's for sure. Yeah. And so, there's all those things. Plus, making it compliant with New Zealand regulations. And we've been lucky with another little factory boat we bought in, which was in class. So when we come here to change it into New Zealand survey standards, it was compliant. But you still had to get the electrical survey to suit the standards. So it's a lot of stress involved for the fishermen, and geez, like the commercial guys that are privately owned. It's bloody hard work for the guy, especially when you're a one-man band.
Well, that's why they need people like yourself as a First Mate Navigator. And I guess, the research that we did, or Massey University actually did, showed that the biggest stressor for fishermen and actually marine farmers was compliance and regulation, the burden of that, not just the burden of that, but the cost associated with that. So I guess that's probably a a good message to the government of today or next round is less of that and more productivity. Or, we can't wind ourselves up in rules and requirements to the stage that we can't do anything. Or what's the economy look like if, I've already got a shortage of people and a shortage of workers, and if it's too hard for them to do what they want to do, no one's going to do it. And that's a bigger problem that we all face, really, Dave, isn't it?
Yeah. They need to be able to, well, I know that they're trying to tighten on their costs and everything in government, but they need to support places like First Mate Navigator, because we've got, or groups like that, because we've got the farmers getting support. There's other industries that are getting support, but it's hard to get support for the fishing industry, the commercial sector. It seems to me as if it's a bit one-sided that way. We've got funding available for all sorts of support for other industries, but not a hell of a lot for the commercial sector.
Yeah, we're left in the dark a little bit, aren't we? So,
Well, it seems to be.
unfortunately, but that's all changing, I guess, with the current minister. Anyway, he's certainly raising the profile of the industry, which is good, and long may it continue. So look, I want to thank you for coming, Dave. It's been awesome, and we've learnt a lot, and I'm sure people will enjoy the podcast. And thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Darren, and I'd like to thank everyone that's actually helped me along the way in my career.
Not a problem. And there's probably a few other, and you've helped a lot as well. So I'm sure they would like to thank you for the support that you've given them throughout their career. So thank you, and catch you next time.
Cheers.
So that's it. So that's Dave Wakefield. A pretty colourful life in the fishing industry and still going strong. So look, if you enjoyed, please subscribe. We've actually uploaded a video to show you how to subscribe, because we've learnt that a lot of people don't know how to. Please send us a comment. We like to read those. Hit the like button. And if you're feeling really generous, hit that super like button, so that every cent that we bring in helps us with our costs to keep the old Gleam floating largely, so we've got somewhere to film and record. So look, thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next one.